very much. Hello? It's not working, this one? I'll try to raise my voice. I'm Elma. I am basically Albanian, but I've been living here for long, and I'm part of IRF. Thank you very much to Dr. Akyol and all the panel members for the interesting points raised this afternoon. Basically, I don't have much to disagree. It's just that I would like to add a few points to steer some perspective, right? Because when Dr. Farouk talks about 1% of scientific output in the Muslim world, I cannot help but think of Syria, I cannot help but think of Iraq, and some of the other countries that a few decades ago might as well have produced something, and now they are in this condition that they are today. So Mustafa mentioned something very interesting, and he talked about Ibn Hanbal, or the Hanbali school of thought, in fiqh discourse, of course. Because in fiqh area, we had 4 schools, and the smallest percentage, historically speaking, in the Muslim world was actually subscribing to Hanbali thought, which was the most traditional, or if I'm allowed to say without any prejudices, the most irrational one. Very structure-based and not open to ray and to opinions, right? But that was the smallest percentage, geographically speaking and historically speaking. So the question is, how did it come that today it sort of represents the most of who we are? And this question could lead us to think about the role of powers to be, historically, not only today, but the kings of certain times, the colonial powers of certain times, the corrupted governments we have today, and all of them, how did they pick up certain ideas from Muslim scholars, and how did they make it and force it into mainstream? Because, I cannot help but think, like, my grandfather, he was much more rational compared to some of the young Salafi-inspired people that, we have today. I'm speaking for my country. So, me, I read a lot about Islam and I know, but then how about somebody else who doesn't know? They think that the Salafi young people we have today, who are like totally irrational, are the prototype of a Muslim of 200 years ago, of 1,000 years ago, or, more, to go in time. So the point is, no, it is not a prototype, but how did it become a prototype? It's not because of our ulama. Like Dr. Mustafa said something very right. They both sides of the schism, they had mistakes. Aristotle had mistakes. Every scholar in history of the world, they were wrong on certain areas, they were right in certain areas. This is how, the dialectics, that's how it develops. But the point is, who chose this kind of wrong, like the occasionalism of Al-Ghazali? It's simply misunderstood. Because they took it with very grave implications to mean that there is no natural laws, and definitely it's very grave consequences. But then they could have taken also to mean what Heisenberg did in 20th century, to work on the principle of indeterminacy. So who chose to take up that kind of idea, which was a simple seed, a genial seed of idea actually, to mean something very negative for our ummah? So not only blame one side or the other side, I think it's more about to do with us being lazy, like people. Like Dr. Farouk said something very interesting. You take up some water, holy water, you spray, and then, the cure comes. It's much easier like that, and I prefer it like that rather than spend 20 years of my life study some medicine and try to find the cure. So we simply like it, and we prefer the easy way, right? So that's how we have fallen back to supernaturalism and textualism. But the point is that let's have some perspectives. like Al-Ghazali, I read some of the texts that he wrote, some kind of quotes, what he said about women, it's terrible. But then similar things I can read in Aristotle as well, and I read it actually. But then at the same thing, I was very surprised to find out that although we blame him so much, he was the one who introduced logics in Muslim madrasa in the 12th century. But we don't mention much. So it's also about how we interpret what happened in the past, and sometimes it's very simplistic. So yeah, it's a question, who contributes to what we are today and why we are in this very undesirable state. Thank you so much.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, based on the topics Tertutupnya Pemikiran Kaum Muslimin, I think this title is very ambiguous because it refers to, if I'm not mistaken, all Muslims. You see, but if you look at the reality and the tradition of the Muslim, we do have two big schools of thought in Shiism as well as in Sunnism. And I think this topic especially meant for the Sunni school of thought, where until now we only follow the four mazhabs and some other mazhabs. But not in the Shi'i school of thought. Until now they still have their maraja', they still have their mujtahid, even they institutionalize it as we understand it. There is one question, there is one statement that we have to clear it because it is problematic for some of us. If you talk about the pintu ijtihad is closed, nobody ever declared that he or she saying that door of ijtihad is closed. It is the inability of Muslims to come up, from the killing their own reason. That is the reason. It is not because of the door of ijtihad is closed. That is second. The third one is the idea of causality. As we mentioned, we do have the idea of causality in theology and kalam and also in philosophy. So there are two extremes and we should have synthesized it. As Brother Farouk mentioned about he admired the idea of free will. So if the idea of free will in philosophy, it is related to people who believe in the absolute power that other than God has. Fire burns. So it means fire absolutely has its power for burning. So the other side is free determination, or they call it Jabariyah. So what you have mentioned about total free will is in the school of thought of Qadariyah. It means that people have absolute power in whatever they do, whatever they like, and whatever they want. And God has nothing to do with that. And this is the other extreme. So I think you have to think about it again. And the other one is the idea of causality, as I mentioned, that some people believe that fire has absolute power to burn. And the other one is other extreme saying that this is all from God. There is the idea of Jabariyah. But if you ask David Hume, for instance, he believes that fire burns until now because we experience it all the while, that fires burns. But tomorrow we not yet experience it. It could be different way. So if we go back to the scripture, when Allah mentioned to Ibrahim, if I'm not mistaken, the verse where Allah Ta'ala, I think it's about being burned, but I couldn't remember the verse actually. It's talk about when Allah tried burns because it makes the fire cool and safe. It is not only cold, but it's safe. قُلْ يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. But the law of nature does not happen at that moment. It means it's some form of interference of supremacy of God and power of the one, and so on and so forth. And the other one, the most interesting part is the philosophy itself. Because most people, they have a PhD, doctor of philosophy in hadith, doctor of philosophy in nanotechnology, so many, areas. But at the same time, they go against philosophy. This is a very, very bad, what I call it, the self-contradiction, which happens right now. And if you go back to the hadith, for instance, Prophet mentioned, Tafakkur fi sa'ah khairan min ibadati sanah. Other riwayah says that Tafakkur fi sa'ah khairan min ibadati sab'ina sanah. It means the idea of thinking itself is already there in Islam. But inability, and we prohibited ourselves from think out of the box, That is the whole idea. The whole idea. And again, Wahhabism, as we mentioned, that they adopted literalism as their ways of interpreting things, fine. But in some extent, they are also some sort of liberalists, because they try to liberate themselves from following a certain mazhab, a specific mazhab. It means that we try to kill our reason at some extent. And in some extent, we let it freely without a limit. Because in philosophy also we understand that everything as a created being has its own limitation. So now I throw out the idea to the panelists to comment.
Basically there are a few things over here. Before I forget, because there are so many things being brought up. I think the most important thing that, what I've been mentioning just now is about the literal understanding and the metaphorical understanding of certain verses, right? So when you talk about this particular verse about, you're talking about that, God has the ultimate power to make, for example, fire cold, for example, like that, right? So, and I say that it's against the, rationality, and it's against the, what is called as the natural laws determined by God himself. What I'm trying to say now is that understanding of that particular verse could be done literally or it could be done metaphorically. So those who believe that there's a metaphorical understanding of the verse were saying that this concept of fire of burning Ibrahim, for example, was the mihnah, it was the tribulation that was faced by Ibrahim himself. It was not a literal fire as you read in that particular verse. So it's not. What I'm trying to say is that there's nothing irrational in the Quran itself. Similarly, as what Brother Sari Abu Ruah mentioned just now about Isra and Mi'raj, for example. If you look at the metaphorical understanding of this Isra and Mi'raj, like if you look at even Ibn al-Qayyim in Zadul Ma'ad, and I think it was mentioned by Muhammad Asad as well in his extensive message of the Quran, translation and of the message of the Quran, tafsir of the Quran. He has 4 what they call appendices at the end of the tafsir, and one of the 4, I think it was on Isra and Mi'raj, or what he termed as the night journey, right? He quoted from Ibn al-Qayyim and says that it was basically a spiritual experience of Muhammad, right? And I think Haikal and a few other scholars, Islamic scholars, mentioned the same thing. Meaning to say, it was not a dream. He was saying a spiritual experience, which was different from a dream altogether. And it's, to him, is, if you think that, if we say that, okay, then it's not mu'jizat, it's not something extraordinary. right? Because, you know, rather than traveling by, with your body and soul, well, he was saying that, you know, if his spirit was able to travel at that distance, meaning to say, and he's still alive, means that it was a real, more mujizat than to be able to travel by body and by soul. So that was the spiritual experience of the Prophet himself. So meaning to say that, you know, there are many verses in the Quran that even though we think, you know, from the literal understanding of reading, that is irrational, right? Or it is against the natural laws, but in actual sense, that nothing goes against the natural laws. If we read Tafsir al-Manar and, you know, Muhammad Abduh and al-Maraghi, for example, we'll see that, you know, everything can be explained. There's nothing that is supernatural and nothing to be extraordinary about all these kind of things. And about this, I think he was mistaken about what I mentioned about free will. I think what I meant by free will is that, you know, like nothing is predetermined by God. You know, whatever we do is the doctrine of Mu'tazilah says that we are the product of, we will bear the product of our deeds, right? So whether we go to heaven or we go to hell was based on us, on what we did in our lifetime. And that is the understanding of the concept of justice or underlie in the doctrine of the Mu'tazilah. I think Brother Mustafa, could you explain further? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello? Is it working? Yes. Thank you so much, Brother Farooq, and thanks for the contributions. I just, you know, had a few thoughts while listening to the feedback. Is my voice here? Okay, good. One thing, the role of the state. Before that, Asharites, Hanbalites. I mean, do Muslims generally know these things? Like, ask a Muslim on the street, like, are you an Ashar? Who knows, right? In that sense, maybe it's not important. But still, these medieval schools of thought are important because they left a certain mindset and a culture. So even if you do not know that you're an Asharite, that kind of thinking has actually shaped our culture. And it has consequences. Like, for example, on the issue of free will, destination, predestination, one thing, you probably know, in Saudi Arabia, during the Hajj, accidents happen very frequently. Like thousands of people who go there as Hajj, they die because some stampede happens. Like last year, a crane fell down. So a lot of people have died in the Hajj in the past 2 decades. And I checked what the Saudis are saying on these things, and the first reaction that comes, like, it's the will of Allah. I mean, it was it just happened. It's qadar. Like, well, no, because it happens because you did not calculate enough, and you are not taking responsibility for that. So qadar, which means like predestination, becomes a way to save ourselves from responsibility. So that kind of thinking, that person doesn't know he's referring to Jabriya or something in medieval school of thought, but it has an influence. So I think we have to think these things. I personally think that I agree with the Qadariya school, which means free will, and therefore the Mu'tazila. So the second speaker said, you know, there are two extremes. Well, I agree with one of the extremes there, which is the Mu'tazila approach, in which, yes, there is free will. God has given us free will. Is it absolute? It is not absolute because God created us. I mean, our will is created by God. So, of course, nothing is absolute other than God himself. But in my understanding, in the understanding of the Mu'tazila tradition, God has given us the power to will decide things. And that is why we will be judged in afterlife and either go to heaven or hell, because our decisions have consequences and we take responsibility. To have responsibility, we should have freedom. So that is one way of understanding it. The other way of the Jabriya school, which influenced the Asharites and everything as well, in that side as well, like because they don't want to limit the power of God, they destroy human free will. And they think that everything is under God's control. But then they create an image of God which has no sense of justice. God does whatever he wills. He puts people in hell or heaven or hell, and you can't ask why. You can't understand the justice behind why. Whereas if you have free will, you can understand and substantiate God's justice. So these are medieval debates, I think, that still keep on shaping some cultural codes. That's why they are important. Now, Alma, is that the name? I didn't get it wrong? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Of course, there's a politics to it. And actually, we couldn't find time to discuss that. In medieval history, when you look at Islamic thought, the dominance of the Asharite school and the decline of Mu'tazila was very much of a political decision. At some points, the Mu'tazila won the politics, and they were, you know, the official doctrine of the Abbasid Caliphate, but then they used it terribly, and then there was a backlash, and then ultimately the political powers at the time preferred the Asharite doctrine, and the book also mentions that too, but that's a known story. And because typically states, if they're especially autocratic, despotic states, they want obedient people. And a theology that instills the culture of obedience rather than questioning helps states. Maybe this is still continuing in our Muslim world around some states. I don't want to name any of them, but you can guess. So therefore, the states, and I think that's why the infusion of state and religion from the beginning in Islam has not been helpful to us. We are generally proud of it, saying we always had a state. Maybe it had bad consequences. So, and you see actually diversity more in early Islamic thought. And the more you have centralized despotic states taking control, you more see one doctrine imposed on another. So yes, and in the modern era, modern Muslim dictatorships or colonial powers certainly had something to do. I mean, why Neo-Hanbali thought in the form of Saudi Arabia has become so powerful in the Muslim world, this has something to do with Western policy. It has something to do with oil as well. It has something to do with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So there are many things, of course, the world history is so complicated. In Russia, there was in early 19th century, among the Muslims of Russia, there was a school called Jadidism. Jadid means new. So it had brilliant, like Muslim theologians like Musa Bigiev, Jarullah Bigiev. They were kind of Salafiyya in the positive sense, like Muhammad Abduh, kind of revivalists. They were suppressed by the Russian empire, Russian state. They preferred the Qadimists, the one which preferred orthodoxy, because that looked politically more stable. So there is a lot of political influence, and that political influence can be coming from West, coming from non-Western powers, coming from Muslim rulers themselves. That is all true, so there is a long history. And it is true that, Imam Ghazali should not be condemned. He introduced Sufism into mainstream Sunni, and I think taught, and that was, I think, a positive contribution. Rather than today's Salafis who think Sufis are kafirs. He didn't do that. So he also, accepted logic, not all philosophy. But also he condemned philosophy as a way to find truth, which actually crippled the rational strain in Islam and philosophy. So it has a bad effect. So there are no black and white here. There's no black and white. But we Muslims should be able to look at our own tradition. The problem we have today is that our ulama has taught that some schools of thought are the heretics. They are, there's only one firqa najiyah, the one saved, that's Ahl Sunnah mainstream, and everything else is full of heresy, and we should not hear them. No, we should learn from them. And this book always speaks of, for example, Mu'tazila, but there's another medieval school of thought, I think very important, that's the Murji'a. Murji'a was not emphasizing rationality, they were emphasizing something else that we need. It was pluralism. They said we cannot judge people, only Allah knows people's faith. Outside, observance is not a measure. So they basically said no Muslim should call each other kafir, and they oppose the idea of takfir, which is very important today. People kill each other by doing takfir. And John Locke has similar ideas, to develop liberalism within the Christian context. So Murji'a is also other medieval school. The problem today is that open a classical Sunni textbook. These are the heretical, deviant firqa, parties. The Murji'a, Mu'tazila, their kafirs, don't listen to them. Well, no, they left a legacy that we can learn from. And reviving the rational thought is, I think, one of those. Is the Ghazali idea of unpredictability, is it relevant to Heisenberg? Interesting point. You could go from that, and I would also say Ghazali turned out to be right in the idea that the universe had a beginning. The Big Bang Theory proves Ghazali right on that. I mean, the universe had a beginning. Al-Kindi also, as I said, agreed with that. So, but the question is, can we have a understanding of religion that is flexible? I mean, we can build that bridge, but by doing that, we are jumping into the idea of modern science, which is a way of finding truth. Can we believe in that? Can we take that as a guide? So I think, yes, maybe Ghazali will turn out in some other issue true, but the question is, can we learn from outside? Anything that is coming from the kuffar, is it by itself doomed? Today, modern Muslims have accepted that. If cell phones come from kuffar, it's fine. We love it. iPhone 7, iPhone 8, we buy it. But like a scientific theory comes, we're not sure whether it's haram or halal. Maybe it's wrong. Then you should, like theory of evolution, one great example, right? Like just the Turkish government took theory of evolution from textbooks. Now, I'm a person who spent many years studying Darwin and the critics of Darwin and all that. So I know there is an issue there. But is the solution to not learn it? Close your ears, not learn, make Muslim students hear about the idea that, no, that will keep us ignorant. The solution is to learn what is the Darwinian theory of evolution, study its arguments, then see how it is interpreted differently. It's interpreted in an atheistic way, it's interpreted in a theistic way, and some Muslim medieval thinkers actually spoke about a form of evolution. And there are actually things that evolution do not explain, so maybe here's another aspect. So learn all this, but that is one reaction. That would be the Mu'tazila way of looking at it. Let's learn modern science, what it is, let's learn philosophy, and let's struggle with it, let's wrestle with it, and let's create an interpretation of Islam that will be universally meaningful. The other approach is call it haram, ban the books, and tell Muslim students not to never hear about it. And when they hear about it, they will be all shocked and don't know what to do. Unfortunately, some of us are choosing the latter way. It's not helping us. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Assalamu alaikum. It's very interesting. The talk that you go back to the past and try to solve the problem of the present. But it seems the statements are also sweeping and so general. Man is far more complicated. We are actually quite contradictory. You can find a scientist who is a believing Hindu in pantheism and who's actually a very great mathematician at the same time. So how do you reconcile these two? Trying to argue just either you're Mu'tazila or you're Asharite, I think it's probably too black and white. I mean, when I'm hungry, I eat. I don't know of any Asharite who says, when I'm hungry, I don't eat. So how do we use the past? It's interesting. I know we are colored by the past, as we are always influenced by this either Asharite or Mu'tazila debate. However, how do we move forward from that today? So what are the baby steps that you need to take? I mean, trying to argue against a person, you need to totally change from Asharite to Mu'tazila, and then only you can work things out, would be a little too much to ask. So is there a bridge in between, or how can we just move along the process at least a bit?
Thank you. Just a short question. I wonder if there's any relationship between the so-called closing of the Muslim minds with adoption of an official position on Islam by the government, by the authorities. Is there any correlation between that? And secondly, I also wonder if this type of conversation is happening in other religions. This idea that we need to revive the religious civilization and so on. Is it just us talking, or is other religion doing the same as well?
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry for my bad English. As I know, Mu'tazila, they know that the Hanbali, the Ash'ari, all these groups, those who have factories fabricating hadith. So the Mu'tazilah, they don't use hadith. They try to understand the Quran by their own principle, and they try to absorb some things from Roman philosopher, which is human being made also. So I think they are good, but they are stray away because they use the philosophers made by human being. And secondly, I want to say is the human being behaviors always like to change God religion. And that is the big problem. God religion is God religion. Human being thinkings is human being thinkings. But now they try to modify God religion to meet what they want or their interests or their aims. That is the problem. This happened since Nuh alayhi salam, when they try to change God religions. Until now, they try to change God religion. Actually, Allah SWT said in the Quran that we should understand the Quran by the Quran itself. وَلَا يَأْتُونَكَ بِالْحَقِّ إِلَّا جِئْنَكَ وَأَحْسَنَ تَفْسِيرًا. So, when we understand the Quran from by own interpretation, it is wrong, big wrong. For example, I give you one meaning, one thing. When I go to a bank asking for a loan, I have to sign hundreds of signatures on the documents agreement between me and the bank. Who should decide the definition, the terms in the documents? I decide or the bank that should decide? Of course, the bank that should decide the definitions and the terms in the document. Also happen to the Quran. We cannot understand the Quran as we want, cannot. The definitions of the Quran, the term of the Quran, been given already in the Quran. So we do not need all these sects, all these mazahib to understand the Quran. We just go into the Quran purely and try to understand the Quran from the Quran itself. By this way, inshallah, we can understand Quran properly as God say, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. The Quran is easy to understand, but we need the right principles to commit to it in understanding the Quran. Sorry for bad English.
Thank you.
First of all, I mean, do daily life get affected from these doctrines? Of course, Asharites, Hanbalis, they all believe in natural order in the sense that they have a daily life. They get hungry and they accept that. But that thinking, this allowed the development of scientific theoric thinking. Like if you don't accept something like gravity or 4 fundamental forces of nature, you can't build theories about that, and that doesn't turn into modern science. And that happened in our part of the world. Now we are getting science from the outside, but we were not able to build that, and that's not only about that, that's about economy and everything, but that has something to do with the denial of theoretical thinking, which was much more lively at the back. And it's not an accident the people who developed that science were not from that school, but from the Akhlire or the philosophy school. So it has consequences. I'll tell you one thing. How do we understand God? How do we imagine God is also a part of our daily life. I once remember a story in Pakistan. There was in a school, this happened a few years ago in Pakistan. The Imam asked who doesn't love Prophet Muhammad? And a kid misunderstood the question. He thought, who loves Prophet Muhammad? And he raised his hand. And then he realized he got the question wrong. But then the Imam said, you kafir, your true self came out. The boy was so afraid, he cut his own hand that night and gave it to the Imam. And here is a culture in which Allah is seen as this irrational, angry deity who will punish a boy because he misunderstood a question. Like, or you can say, well, of course Allah knows his heart. I mean, it's our way of conceptualizing God. Like, I think in the Hanbali Asharite tradition, God is somebody we cannot understand, whose commandments are just obeyed. You cannot question the meaning of that. By question, you cannot try to understand the purpose. The idea of maqasid does not develop there. Like, what's the intention of God in this? So, therefore, these medieval debates, I believe, are important. And even if we don't know them, it's important to know, because when I learned these debates, I said, oh, actually, the way I used to think comes from that. Well, interesting. It came 10 centuries down there, but it's a way to open up our minds. So I think it's important. Official position, yes, the state has been definitive in shaping Islamic doctrine. And we see this from the very beginning. The Qadari school, the free will school, was suppressed by the Umayyad dynasty in the beginning. Because the Umayyad sultans, with a few exceptions, were corrupt, tyrants. And the Umayyads realized that if the idea of predestination becomes powerful in the Muslim world, predestination supports the political power. Because they said, we are sitting on the throne because God predestined. How do you oppose us? So they executed one of the scholars from the free will Qadari school for apostasy, and so that's how apostasy came into our language, to kill people you don't agree with, kill Muslims. So, and then Abbasids came. Abbasids supported the Mu'tazila, the proto-Mu'tazilites would be Mu'tazila for a while, but then there's been a shift in Abbasi thought, and ultimately, after the Abbasid, the Seljuks too, they supported the Ash'ari school, which became the establishment. In my view, I wish the political authority never intervened. We had a Muslim free market of ideas, so Muslims would be able to argue, as it was the case for a while. I mean, you listen to some of the narrations of Baghdad in the 9th century, or there were the Hanbalis, there were the Hanafis, there were the Mu'tazila, there were the Shia. They were all engaging with each other, and that was the most lively and productive time. But once states imposed one doctrine all across the Muslim world, that led to the stagnation. Yes, so the political authority had a big role. Are other religions discussing these issues? Great question. I think, I should check that. but Christians are discussing, but I think in Christianity, you already have a lot of traditions that are already being kept alive. They already go back and discuss, and that was allowed by the division into Protestants and Catholics and different kind of Protestants and Eastern Orthodox. So that diversity has been, I think, kept there. In Judaism, there is a division of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, modern Orthodox, Reformed, conservative. These kind of Jewish traditions exist, and they don't do takfir and kill each other. Well, actually, they do takfir, but don't kill each other. The ultra-Orthodox think other Jews are not real Jews, but there's not at least violence involved. And so that is partly probably possible because these religions have flourished under democracies in the past 5 years in the Western world and so on and so forth. But going back and discussing some medieval concepts, it happens. I've seen it in other traditions. As for Buddhists, I don't know, but I think Buddhists need to come out and condemn the Buddhist genocidal extremists in Myanmar who are killing Muslims. So, I've seen a moderate Muslims declaration on that, but I think more needs to be done. Regarding Hadith, the Quran, now I'm very much sympathetic to the argument that we should question the Hadith literature and take Quran as the main guide. That's true. Because the Hadith literature itself was produced by the Ahl Hadith, who precisely were horrified by Ahl Ray, the people of reason, and who wanted to find a Hadith on everything to find a concrete solution. Like Imam Hanbal said, he never eats watermelon because he never found a Hadith saying that Prophet Muhammad ate watermelon. he thought that you should find a textual justification for everything, whereas the Ahli Ray position would be, if it's not haram, it's free, so unless it's explicitly haram. So the search for hadith and writing them down, which came quite later, like 150 years later, is partly because of the tension between them. Which doesn't mean that the hadith collections are not valuable. It doesn't mean that we should trash them out, as some people say. But we should understand that they are the making of a historical process. And the Imams who tried to create these Sahih collections, they could be wrong, they did their best, but these are not sacred books in the sense of Quran. But one more thing, to say the Quran is very open and let's go understand it and ask it, that is not that easy either. You said like there's a bank and you and make a contract and you can ask the bank. We can't ask God, what did he actually mean in the Quran? I mean, there's no new revelation, there's no new prophet. So we are left with the struggle to understand the Quran. And the Quran is clear in its own context, but when we move it from today, we need an interpretive filter. Like the Quran is speaking about certain wars and events, what exactly they were, what does that mean today? This is a question. So therefore, I would not be in favor of like a Quranic literalist fundamentalism either. We should understand, and we need historical knowledge to understand the Quran. We need the knowledge we get from the hadiths to understand the context of the Quran. But it is true that some of the more open-minded, freedom, promoting approaches we find in the Quran were later pushed aside. One example, La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in religion. Go open some translations of the Quran. You will see it's written a little differently. They put a parenthesis in between. There's no compulsion in the acceptance of religion. I mean, they put parentheses, in the acceptance of, then close the parentheses, go. Why do they turn La ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in religion, to there is no compulsion in the acceptance of religion? Because they think that there's no compulsion in religion clashes with some hadiths which tell apostates should be killed. So they say, oh, there's no compulsion in entering Islam, but if you want to exit, sorry, we kill you. So we have to interpret the Quran accordingly. So that's a bad way of interpreting the Quran, by putting the parentheses in between. So yes, the Quran should be our guide, and the Quran is the only undisputed source we have. But there also, it's not that simple to say, let's just take a few verses, understand them, it's finished. And we should try to understand the Quran in its historical context as well. I think Fazlur Rahman did really great studies on this and left us intellectual legacy that we should develop as a theologian. So that's what I can say on that. Thank you. Well, how to move forward? First of all, to create a medium of intellectual discussion. Like, we should be able to have these discussions without being labeled murtad or kafirun or this and that. And I'm glad in Malaysia we have that. In some part of the Muslim world, you don't have that. And another way of calling somebody, the more modern political version of calling somebody murtad is to say, oh, you're an Orientalist, or you're by a CIA agent or something. That's the secular version of Salafi takfir. That happens in Turkey a lot. When you say, we need to revival in Islamic thought, they say, oh yeah, this is a CIA Mossad agenda or something. Like, then you can't speak about it. Then all you have to say is that let's just follow what we have, and let's follow the great leader that we have today. So, first of all, opening up the space that we can discuss these things is most important. And Muslims without, doing takfir on each other. And of course, we need economic, we need a lot of things. We need scientific progress. And we need a relationship with the non-Muslim world without any complex, without any inferiority complex. And that inferiority complex sometimes becomes the form of so much being in love with the West that you try to eat and wine and dine exactly like they do, or You make a hat revolution to, as we did in Turkey in 1924, the stupidest revolution in ever, like to force people to wear bowler hats as the Westerners do. That's wrong. The other inferiority complex is to say we should deny everything they're saying. That is positioning yourself against the West with some obsession of sorts. We should understand that the West or the Japanese or other civilizations might have some ideas that we can learn from. They might have some problems to which we can point and make some criticisms as well. But we should have a relationship without any obsessive complex of sorts.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amal Chima, and I had a question regarding a book that I read. In my hometown library in Sharon, Massachusetts, there's a book written by Ali Rizvi, who calls himself an ex-Muslim. He grew up as a Shia in Saudi Arabia, and his book is called The Atheist Muslim. In this book, his solution for opening the Muslim world's mind is to say that the Quran is fallible, meaning that it cannot be taken literally, for it to be compatible with human rights, feminism, other sorts of democratic or rational thoughts. And I'm wondering what sort of discourse that we can have to address a growing problem amongst at least my generation, in which a lot of people are looking at reason and rationality and reconciling it with faith, but then also choosing to say that, you know, we cannot see the Quran as a literal book. We cannot see it as like a book of God's word. And I think the question there in it of itself is to be simply put, how can we as a Muslim community create dialogue and discourse by giving credence to our religious text without sacrificing the sort of fundamentals that keep Islam necessary and also infallible? Thank you.
I was listening to both Dr. Akil and Dr. Farouk. Dr. Akil, you said that we need to change ourselves. God will not change our fate unless we do it. And then Dr. Farouk, you were mentioning about there's no such thing as fate, if I'm getting that correctly. Just a simple example. If, for example, a Muslim goes into business or studying and he's striving, he's working hard, he has a certain, he has an ambition, certain level that he wants to reach. So he spent a few years, but he doesn't get there. There's some, there's some segments, there's some communities in the world at the moment that if you don't reach what you get, what you strive for, they do get depressed, they do commit suicide. I think it used to be a practice in Japan. As a matter of honor, they do commit suicide. And I visited Scotland a few years ago, and apparently the youth over there, they fall out of love, they do actually jump off a cliff, commit suicide. So how do we reconcile what is fate, what is qada and qadar, what is written for us, predestination, and striving to improve ourselves? Because I think as I see it, well, I can only speak about my own race, the Malaysia in this country. They talk about nasib, qada and qadar, basically. That's it. You know, no matter how hard you work, that's it. What we are born into, we have to accept. You know, so how do we reconcile about that? Striving hard, but at the same time, not going overboard. We don't reach that ambition. We don't try to commit suicide, or we don't, you know, take unlawful means just to get what we want to get. Thanks.
So, Ali Rizvi and his book, The Atheist Muslim. I didn't read the book, but I've heard about the book. First of all, I mean, someone is not technically a Muslim if he's an atheist too, but probably culturally he means that. And if someone says the Quran is fallible, probably that person is not a Muslim anymore, even if he doesn't say, I'm an atheist. I mean, to believe that the Quran is the word of God is, I think, the minimum requirement for being a Muslim. So his argument was that to be a part of the modern world, we should accept that the Quran is fallible. And you said then also open to interpretation? You said?
Open to cherry picking.
Okay, well, I don't think we have to do that, and we will not do that, but the question is, do we interpret the Quran and understand it in historical context?
So I think the question, he's saying,
Well, okay, I would disagree with him, and you can say that. I mean, what does he achieve by reason? To me, first of all, to believe that the Quran is the word of God is not something you can rationally prove, but you can disprove as well. And there are things that are beyond reason. Like, you can't rationally prove there's afterlife, but you can disprove it as well. This is metaphysical. And metaphysics is a sense of belief, and that belief is in itself not in conflict with reason. So everybody has metaphysical beliefs. Atheists have metaphysical beliefs. They say there's no God. That's a metaphysical belief. As someone who has no metaphysical belief is the ultimate nihilist who doesn't believe in anything, including his own senses and the existence of the outside world or anything. So that is a very difficult position to arrive and sustain. So people tend to believe in something. So therefore, there are tenets of Islam that are belief, and they are beyond reason but not against reason. And what is in the Quran that is against reason? Is it miracles? Well, to believe in miracles, I mean, I partly maybe think of it a little differently there. To believe that God can do a supernatural act is not against reason. I think, you know, God can do supernatural acts. I just think that there's a natural order he created, but he can violate that natural order whenever he wills. So it's not irrational, I think, to believe that. So, I mean, I don't buy that argument, but you said he was a Shia Muslim who grew up in Saudi Arabia, and he became an atheist. There are a lot of ex-Muslims in the world. Some of them are in the West, and some of them are outspoken. And I've had conversations with some of them. And when you like dig a little bit, like, why are you an ex-Muslim? How did you become an atheist? You generally, again, there might be exceptions, but you find deep resentments against something that has happened to them in the name of Islam. Like, I once met an Iranian taxi driver in some city in the US. I said, "Salam alaikum." He said, "I don't use that language anymore, you know. I'm not a Muslim," and so on. I mean, his name is Muhammad, so I said, "Salam alaikum." And the guy turned out to be a fierce atheist. And I said, "Okay, I understand, I respect your position, but like, how did you become an atheist?" Then he told me how his father was jailed and tortured by the Iranian regime, and how the mullahs are like corrupt and autocratic. And I said, "That's okay, you're telling me that you don't like the Iranian regime." And he said, "That's the Islamic regime." And I said, "Oh, actually you are angry at a state that acts in the name of Islam. And that made you go away from Islam as well." So that's another poisonous result of mixing religion with politics, or having authoritarian systems in the name of Islam. You oppress people, and you do it in the name of Islam, they ultimately become enemies of Islam as well. So I haven't read his book, but I haven't checked his articles, but that's what I can say. And I think by establishing reason, we are not going against the fundamentals of the faith. But like, we are just using, for example, basic idea that there should not be contradiction in our like religious texts. So if there seems to be a contradiction, we should interpret it somehow and put it in context. So these kind of approaches are needed, but reason doesn't make you necessarily an atheist or reject the texts themselves, as in the case with Christianity or Judaism. There was another question. How do we, first of all, thank you for bringing that interesting case that I didn't know that well. In Japan, there's a culture of trying to be successful, and if you don't do that, you commit suicide. Is that correct? Like, some people do this? Oh, honor killing out of lack of success. Not that, you know, you just betrayed our family or something. Well, this is one example showing what Islam and Abrahamic, maybe monotheism in general, can help the world by establishing certain values. You wouldn't have this problem in Muslim culture because it is generally accepted that your life is given to you by God, and only God can take it away from you. So you should stick to your life, and you should be alive, you know, and try to make your life better. Or, for example, I think Islam in the same way introduced a very big vision to India by disrupting the caste system. You know, caste system is, I think, I mean, if they're Hindus, with all due respect, but caste system is something to me quite terrible it structures people and it tells them that you're here to stay, you should. And whereas Islam brought the idea of equality. Like there's no cost in Islam, everybody's equal. So that is something we brought to the world stage as a contribution. So there are values like that we can present to other civilizations, but we have to figure out our own problems. To that kind of culture which thinks that lack of success should be punished by killing yourself, well, as a Muslim I would say, well, what is success? To me, success would be to be a morally upright person, to be a decent person. And you may not be the top executive in a big company making $20,000 a month or something, but you're trying your best and you have God-given faculties. Are you using them? Even if you fail, well, you failed and you learn from your lessons, you try to do it better. And ultimately, this world is a place of tests. It's not the ultimate abode that we have. There is an afterlife. We all struggle for that. So you try to do as much as you can. So you bring some leniency to your own lack of success as well. So that would be the perspective I would give. And this shows that, you know, cultures can evolve and some cultures can be lacking some perspectives. The idea that you should kill yourself, I mean, because of lack of success, is one of those. So maybe we Muslims have something to teach there, and that's what I would tell there. Don't be that obsessed with success, right? Just try to be a good person, and if you have failures, everybody has failures. We're not perfect. Only God is perfect. So we should try to make ourselves better, but we can never reach perfection. So that would be the Muslim and, let's say, broader monotheistic perspective I would bring to a non-Abrahamic society like the Japanese society. Does it make sense? I don't know. Thank you.
I think that went well. I was kind of expecting chairs flying, you know, thrown at each other, but then I was told that this was by invitation only. So we are preaching to the choir to a certain extent, you know. So, but with that, I mean, that was very, what's the word, enlightening. I mean, but I was kind of disappointed to hear that you're doing the same thing, you know, when our dear sister here was asking about whether we should discuss and whether or not Quran is infallible. I was excited to hear what your answer is going to be, but you just put a stop to it and say, that's not a Muslim thing to do, you know. Isn't that like a little bit of the Asharites? But we're not discussing this anymore. We're just going to close this, and we're going to have this discussion later during NAME. I thought that's what IRF people are doing, you know, go all the way, discuss everything all the way. But with that, I think I had a lot of fun in this session, and I hope you do too. I'm supposed to call upon, yes, Suhaib, this young, up-and-coming boy who's already halfway to immortality by this book. We were saying that we can all be immortal by the books that we write. So congrats again, dear Suhaib. And I call upon you to hand out some, where's the name? Some Chandrahati to our esteemed guests.
I should say one thing. All the world should learn from Malaysians to put these beautiful flowers on the new published books. It's amazing. I love it every time.
So you can learn one thing from us, right? To Brother Mustafa Akil. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to have a six visit, yeah? Yeah.
I won't be able to understand this, but I'll keep it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the good work. Thanks to IRF for all the good work.
Next one should be our young berhormat, Datuk Shoaib. Yes. Thank you for that.
I would like to advise all members of the forum today that you must buy this as soon as possible before it is being banned.
Actually, Farooq was worried about this being banned, but then I said, that's not a problem. People usually, there's a spike following the ban, isn't it, for most books. Yeah. So wait for the ban and then buy it. The next, we would like to express your gratitude and appreciation to Dato' Rizwan bin Shairi. Yeah. Would you like to say something?
No, I would like to personally congratulate Shoaib for this wonderful job. He has devoted almost 2 years of work on this book, and I think he deserves hands of applause. Yes. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Big contribution.
Indeed, Shoaib. Yeah. And finally, to, oh no, okay, that's it. Yeah. So I think that's it. All right. Apparently, there's this gorgeous tea waiting for us. So everybody is invited. It's just here, is it? Yeah. So bon appetit. Thank you again for coming. So hope to see you guys in the next session. There's one tomorrow, right? Yeah. Thank you very much, all. Thank you.